Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Danielle Stackis and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations here at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. We're excited that you are able to join us for today's webinar on Shifting Your Identity, the Key to Succeeding in Your Next Role, presented by Eva Doyle, author of The Reluctant Leader, which focuses on helping technical experts become corporate leaders. This webinar is part of the Smith Office of Alumni Relations Professional Development webinar series, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. During the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and Eva will address them at the end of the presentation. Eva has an MBA from the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa and with the highest honors from the University of Tennessee. She and her husband have lived around the world in Australia, Germany, and the UK. Being from the South, she can barbecue everything from schnitzel to kangaroo. Please join me in welcoming author, consultant, and world traveler, Eva Doyle.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm sure you're sitting there at your desk or on your couches, wherever you are, applauding, and I appreciate that. I want to get started with thinking about just a few questions, maybe why you're here. So do you have things that maybe you want to do with your life, and do you come up with excuses not to do them? And do you wish you had a plan to help get you there? So if you can answer yes to any of those, I'm with you. I have been there. I don't have all the answers, but we can talk about shifting your identity, which is a major obstacle or a major step in moving forward. So as Daniel said, we've lived around the world. The last 17 years or so, we've worked for the Defense Department. So we've gotten to live in Germany, Australia, England, Hawaii, Colorado, a lot of beautiful spots. And it's been in a highly technical environment, even though we've been supporting the military, but we've been doing some highly technical work. And I've just had the chance to watch a lot of people struggle with moving from being a technical expert to being a leader of people. So that's what my work has focused on. But with this webinar, what I'd like to do is kind of broaden that approach a little bit and hopefully give you some ideas about how to shift your identity to meet a new challenge, to meet a new role, regardless of whether it's specifically related to leadership or not. Alrighty. So we want this to be an interactive webinar. And we're going to do that in three different ways. So one is a chat exercise. So you should see on your screen a little chat button or the word chat somewhere. And if you'll bring that up and maybe just tell me where you are now, city and state. Just give that a little bit of practice. Okay, so let's see. So I'm being information. People are adding it to the questions tab. Let me find that questions tab. Oh, great. So I see we've got some folks in, Oakland, California. Well, thank you for joining us from there. Falls Church, Baltimore, another California, Nairobi, Kenya. Burtonsville, Ellicott City, Arlington, Gaithersburg, Brazil. This is all very exciting. Some places I haven't actually been. Lorton, New York City, Alexandria. Okay, so great. Thanks for everybody for chiming in there. And then another thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some polls. So the polls will pop up, and Danielle's going to help me with that. And it's going to, our first poll is on lunch. So for those of you who are in a place where you're having lunch, you've got some options there. A turkey sandwich, tomato soup, Caesar salad, some variation of the above, and then for some of you it may be, well, what's lunch? Okay, so we've got some things in the polls in progress here. We've got some responses. Nobody's doing tomato soup. Maybe it's just not the right time of year for that. 20% are saying, what's lunch? And we've also got some turkey sandwich, Caesar salad, and variations there going on. So great. Thanks a lot for participating in that. And we'll do a couple of those along the way. And then the last thing that we'll do is there'll just be some personal exercises for you to do. They won't be shared through the webinar, and of course they'll be completely optional. You won't know if you're doing them or not. But there'll be a chance for maybe you to practice some of the things that I'll be talking about. So just keep that in mind. You may want to have a pen and paper, or have your laptop or iPad or whatever you've got there if you want to take some notes and participate in those exercises. So our agenda today, really focusing on three main things. So what is this identity shift thing? Anyway, what does that mean? Why does it matter? And then once you've decided that it matters, how do you do it? So what is identity, and what does it mean to shift it? I looked up some different definitions of identity, and the one that I'm going to use for today's purposes has to do with that it is an emotional connection to a role. It's going to help drive some kind of behavior. So for many of us, the first part of our identity comes in our family role. We start out as baby, we go to child, maybe now we have a role as parent. Many of us have an emotional connection to whatever our profession may be, whether that's doctor, lawyer, teacher, whatever that may be. And then also gender. For most of us, our gender has a part of our identity. And I just want to mention that for our transgender community folks, is that how strong a force in our identity is that male or female gender identity. It often surprises me that for the transgender folks who go from male to female, because men in most of our societies still have so much power in so many different ways. And for a man to give that up because they identify so strongly with being a woman, I think is a good example of just what a strong force that identity is. And I have a friend in the UK who had gone through the reassignment surgery to become female, and we had a chat about that, and she talked about how different it was to be a woman, but that's what she wanted to be. It's how she felt she was. And even though she had given up a great deal, she felt like it was worth it to her. All right, so we've got another poll to talk about what kinds of things do you identify with. And I've got some things up there that are common for people to do. So Danielle, if you'll want to go ahead and put that up for us. So for some of us, it might be a professional sports team. I certainly know from my time in England that what team you associated with could be a good conversation starter, we'll put it that way. Professional sports team, having spent some time in Colorado, I sort of have developed an affinity for the Broncos. I'm a big fan of Peyton Manning. And when they won that Super Bowl a couple of years ago, you would think I'd won it. I was so excited. I was so happy. I was just on a cloud for a week. Kept waiting for my ring to appear in the mail, but somehow that just never happened. So we've got about 52% of the people have voted so far. Okay, so that's popping up there, but we've got kind of an even split. So many of you are saying you identify with your profession, religious group, nationality, college, university, professional sports team. Those are all sort of even there, but at least at this point, 37%, 38%, moving up, 39, saying that you really, identify. That's part of your identity is that profession, and that makes a lot of sense, certainly for folks who have been to college. So yeah, and I popped up my picture there of my little smart car because that was part of my identity for a while. I drove that little guy. It was a lot of fun, and it was just part of my fun identity. It made me feel happy. It made me feel fun whenever I was in the car. This particular model, I've actually had 3 of them, was in the 2006, 2007, when they weren't quite as common in England as they are now. And as you'll notice that I do have the steering wheel there is on the British side. And it just made me feel great every time I got into it. So some of us also may have that kind of affinity for what we drive. But it's great to know that for many of you, that profession, at this point, 40% say that profession is something that you really identify with. So talking about identity and identity shifts and what that all means, it really is a lifelong activity. Your identity can change as much as and as often as you want really. And it starts when we are babies. That's our kind of our first identity, is being the baby. And then as we grow up and we continue to have other identities there. But I want to talk a little bit about the children, give you a couple of stories. One of them is that whoever has had a second child come along, and the first child now, you need them to, say, get into a bigger bed, a toddler bed, a twin bed. And so most parents that I know have used the strategy of appealing to their identity as the big boy or big girl. You know, oh, we've got you the big girl bed. You can have all your toys with you. You know, mommy can or daddy can lie down with you for a little bit now in your big girl bed. And, you know, oh, you're not a baby anymore. Big girls don't sleep in cribs. They'll use that to help the child adopt the new bed. Because if you try to use with a toddler, say, well, son, if you can tell, you know, mom's going to have another baby and we need the crib for them. And so we've bought this nice big bed for you. Isn't that great? Well, good luck with that. Tell me how that works. But usually it's really focusing in on that identity. And children shed that identity every year as they move through school years. But as we get to be adults and are physically, we're kind of set. Most of us aren't growing at least up. Some of us are growing out. That's another webinar. But it can get harder to change that identity, something that as children we do pretty naturally, where our bodies are growing. It's natural. We see everyone around us is progressing into the next grade, so it's a little bit easier to do that. As adults, it does get just a little harder. And another one quick story, a friend of mine, her third child, a little boy, around 2.5, 3, announced that he was not going to be potty trained until he was 4. That was very important to him. That was something he would do as a 4-year-old. So my friend said, you are 4. She threw him a little party, got a cake, invited a few friends, told the parents, you know, no gifts, but, you know, she said to him, now you're 4, time to be potty trained. And it worked. I always thought that was a great story of using that, his identity to get him to progress to that next step. So this will be a chance for you to do your own activity. So what I'd like you to jot down somewhere is a couple of minutes and think about all the different roles you may have in your life. So I've done a word cloud there of some of them. For me, I'm a writer, a wife, a knitter, photographer, dog lover, Jeopardy fan, all kinds of things, sort of large and small, that you identify with. To just think about all those kinds of different roles that fit in, that fit for you. And while you take a couple of minutes to do that, I'm going to sing the lounge lizard version of Happy Birthday, because I'm certain there's someone out there with a birthday. And it's September, a lot of birthdays in September because January is cold. Won't go any further there, but here we go. A little happy birthday song while you jot those things down. Have yourself a happy little birthday. Let your heart be light. From now on, your troubles will be out of sight. Have yourself a happy little birthday. Let your heart be gay. From now on, your troubles will be miles away. So have yourself a happy little birthday today. Okay, so that was Happy Birthday, and I hope it gave you a couple of minutes to jot some roles down that are meaningful to you. Okay, so one more poll here, and that's how many roles did you come up with? Did you come up with 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, or maybe more than that? Okay, great. We've got a lot of people who are coming in with over 15. It looks like right now the majority came up with 6 to 10, which is great. Still got a little voting there going on. One thing that would be interesting for me to do sometime is to also the split of male versus female. Another time that I've done this, it seemed like it was easier for the women to come up with a lot of different roles, but that may have just been that particular group. But yeah, so we've got a lot of people came up with at least 6 to 10, which I think makes sense. And then some folks are coming up with even more. So great, great. So we've got a lot of different things going on in there that help us define who we are. So shifting roles and identities, some are certainly easier than others. I talked about going from grade to grade as kids. That's usually a very natural thing for people to do. I know for me though, like 5th grade was a great grade. I kind of didn't want to leave it. Sort of found my groove, So even as children, it's not always easy to shift a role. But with some, it's a little bit easier than others. So there are some hobbies and activities that we fairly easily can adopt and then shed as an identity. And a quick example there was that for about 20 years I was a skier, a fairly casual skier. I didn't spend my entire winter on the slopes, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed talking about skiing, looking at skiing magazines, buying ski equipment. It was a lot of fun. And then on a ski trip to Austria, because at least I did it in an exotic location, I snapped an ACL. It was probably the easiest wipeout I'd ever had. It wasn't even a wipeout. It was sort of a gentle fall, but the binding didn't release, and there it went. So no more skiing. It was pretty easy for me to give up that part of my identity because my husband didn't ski. I was getting a little older. I was fine with finding something else to do. And then I decided to try running. So I got myself a Couch to 5K program. It was one of those programs that it gives you intervals. You walk so much, you run a minute, you walk so much, run a minute and a half, and those kinds of things. And it tells you, how great you're doing and all this kind of stuff. And so I was enjoying that. I got a little cocky with it, and I decided to change my route a little bit. Ended up going down a much steeper hill than I anticipated. And a couple of months later, I'm in for knee surgery. At that point, the knee surgeon tells me that if I want to keep running, I'm going to keep having knee surgeries. So that's when I switched to knitting. And you can see the results there in that picture. Technically, that's actually a combination of Tunisian crochet and knitting, but I figured probably most people aren't going to know the difference. But yeah, so now I make hats for my friends who are skiers and runners. So there are also times when we get shifted in ways that we don't want. And while my content doesn't really cover this, if my model helps you, that's great. But I did just want to tell some folks, if this was what you're looking for, I probably won't be able to deliver it, but I did want to at least acknowledge it, is that sometimes we get a shift that we didn't ask for. Losing a spouse through death or divorce. Maybe our children move out. We're maybe not quite ready to have that empty nest. A job loss or retirement. Those are also shifts that are difficult. Now, what I want us to focus on today are the ones that we do want. So in some cases, some of you may be ready for that empty nest. Some of you may be looking forward to a job change or retirement. So this is what we're really going to focus on, is on those roles that we want to take on, but we're just maybe not quite sure how to get there. So my examples there: becoming a leader or a manager at work, becoming an entrepreneur, which can be pretty exciting, becoming a spouse, becoming a parent, taking those steps of adulthood that you don't have to take, but most people do, getting married, having children, those kinds of things. So this will be a chat exercise. And so what are some of the roles and identities that you want to explore? So do you want to become an entrepreneur? Do you want to maybe run a marathon? Do you want to become a parent? Do you want to go back to school, perhaps, and pick up another degree, try another profession? So maybe just if you are willing to share in the chat what kinds of things that you that you may want to explore. Okay. I see maybe some questions. Okay, I'm starting to see some answers. A subject matter expert. See if I can make my box a little bigger. Data scientist, a growing networking and consulting business. Oh, dance choreographer, leader in the company. Great leadership role. Great, great. I got a book for you. Moving in from a project manager into an ownership position. Oh, great, great. Organization leader. Oh, academic librarian. Several friends who are librarians. So great. So thanks for those of you who wanted to type those things in. And I realize a couple of you had made some questions and comments, and we'll certainly do our best to get back to those. So why does it matter? What is this identity shifting? And it matters because the sooner you connect emotionally to that next role, the faster you will adopt it. And the faster you will adopt the behaviors you need for success. And if you're struggling with adopting those behaviors, it's often because shifting that identity involves some loss and grief. Now, in those sudden kind of seismic shifts that I mentioned, like a death in the family, where suddenly you're a widow, or you've lost a parent, heaven forbid, lost a child, all those kinds of things. People get that comes with loss and grief, right? They're there, they do their best to be supportive, to help you keep moving on. But when you just shift from something like being, say, the top robotics engineer to now leading the robotics team, people don't necessarily really think about the fact that there's some loss there. There was something that you were enjoying doing, and now you don't have all of that. You may still have some contact with it because you're leading the team, but you're not actually doing it. Or if you're the leader, you shouldn't be doing it. That's another, I think often that's why we see micromanagement, especially for people who move from being the technical leader to the corporate leader, because there's a big part of them that just does not want to let go of that day-to-day technical work. And so they get over-involved with their team in ways that really aren't helpful. That's why we just need to acknowledge that there's some loss. Now, it may not be the same great sense of loss as when you lose a spouse or a parent, but there's some emotions there that you got to deal with, because if you don't, it's going to be really hard to move on. So the more you can acknowledge, yeah, I do miss some things about my old job. I want to tell you another quick story about this. I got the chance to hear the senator from Minnesota, the comedian Al Franken. Yes, his name escaped me there for a second. And I got the chance to hear him talk about his new book. And one of the things he talked about was that transition from comedian to senator. And some things that I didn't know about, for example, was that he was educated at Harvard. So that was a good thing he tried to emphasize for his election. And when he got to the Senate, one of the things he wanted to do was really encourage them to take him seriously, to show that he was serious about being a senator. It was not just one more step in his comic career. So he'd go to every committee meeting, and he'd be there early, and he'd be ready to take notes, and he was always showing up and early and staying late and all the kinds of things that you want to do to show that you're really serious about this new role. And he became a successful senator, was reelected by a nice healthy margin, and is well respected as a member of the Senate. But one of the things he said was that he did miss his old life. He missed hanging out with comics and comedians, and he missed even being funny, because he really tried to tamp down the humor and show that this Senate gig mattered to him. But he said, I miss that, but in this job, I get to affect people's lives in a positive way and I've never been happier. I thought that was a great example of someone who has shifted their identity into their new role and is acknowledging at the same time that there were things about his prior role that he still misses. I thought that's great. You know, that's great for everybody, a great example that you can shift successfully, and it's okay to miss something that you did before. It's perfectly fine, it's normal, and in fact, it will help you accept your new role better if you're able and willing to do that. I hope that makes sense. So, chat exercise again. What are some concerns that you might have about that next role? And sometimes people aren't always comfortable talking about their concerns, so maybe talk about someone else's concerns. You know, if you know, what concerns do you think maybe people in general might have about moving to a new role for them, a new identity for them? And in case you're at all curious about the picture, this was taken at the Vasa Museum in Stockholm. The Vasa was a ship that was big, huge warship that was constructed kind of badly, and when they first voyage, it pretty much sank in the harbor. And they were able to bring it up several hundred years later and restore it, and it's a fascinating museum, and as part there, yep, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Will I be successful? Do I have the right skill sets? Won't be taken seriously as the boss. Yep. Not feeling adequately prepared. Well, let me tell you, you never do. You never feel prepared enough. But it's a good thing to acknowledge that. Oh, someone asked if the sound stopped working. The sound just went out. I hope it's back for folks. Yes, it's back. Am I perceived as ready? Yep, that's a good thing. Will I make enough money? Will people think I'm too old? That's a good one. Fear of failure, fear of public speaking. All those are good things. Yeah, all those are very legitimate concerns about taking those next steps. Okay. Can you hear me now? I'm also typing that in. Okay, do we have our sound back? Yes. Okay, great. Sorry about that blip. All right, let's see if we can have some steps that may help you address some of those issues. First, I want to talk about share some stories and some examples of some people who shifted well and some who didn't. And I'll start with some of the ones who didn't. Our 4-star general there is General David Petraeus, who is someone that I actually have a lot of respect for. So there's a part of me that almost kind of hates to tell his story, but it's out there. It's not like saying anything that's not public knowledge. But General Petraeus was one of our generals in Afghanistan and did was considered to have done a good job there. And people were saying Petraeus for president. You know, he was really had made a great impression on a lot of folks. In fact, so much so that they asked him to take over as CIA director. So he retired from the military and became the CIA director, and things kind of went down front hill from there. Because as many of you may know, his story is that he was had an affair with a woman who was a reporter and his biographer, and ended up sharing some classified information, and ended up getting I don't think it's a felony charge, but he also had a huge fine, and he's currently on probation. And so if you were following some of the Trump administration appointments, that was one of the ones that they talked about, was that, hey, you know, if they appoint him, you know, he'll have to check in with his probation officer, et cetera. So the articles I read tried to, well, how does this happen? How does this happen to someone who was so successful and who moved to a role that in some ways seems sort of like a lateral move? You know, those are both pretty, you know, high up positions. So how does that happen? And what the reports that I read surmised was that, or kind of trying to guess at that, was that there really is a huge difference between the military culture and that civilian federal culture. So in the military, just let me give you some ideas for those of you who may not have much experience with that, is a 4-star general has his own plane. When a 4-star general travels on land, he has 2 cars. One's considered what's called a chase car. They both have tinted windows. You don't know which one the general is in. And he gets ferried around, everywhere. Anytime he walks in a room, everybody knows how important he is because, see, they have 4 stars on his shoulders. Petraeus is not a huge guy. So when he's in a civilian suit, he kind of looks like everybody else. There's no halo or anything CIA directors wear to indicate, who they are. He drives himself to work. Now, he does have his own parking spot, but there's no home-to-work transportation for a civilian, even a CIA director. So it was just a big, big shift for him, for many of the privileges that come with the military and the status. And like I said, just that instant recognition that you're important to, hey, you're just another guy in a suit kind of thing. So even though on the surface, it might not seem like that huge shift, it really is. It really is a big shift going from that military to civilian culture. And he's an example of someone who didn't make that shift very well. Now, our First Lady. Now, I don't, obviously, I don't personally know Mrs. Trump. She doesn't call me up and say, Aoife, I don't know about this First Lady thing. Aoife, help me. No, she's not calling me. But her behavior would indicate to a lot of people that it's not a role she's fully embracing, right? And we'll talk about behaviors a little bit more there. But I'd say she's someone there who's not really looking to shift. Former president example, Jimmy Carter. If there's anyone else out there who remembers the Carter administration, many people say he is the best post-president example, where he has just his humanitarian work and his peace work and the other things that he has done. Just a great example of someone who many people saw as a failure in office and has gone on to embrace a different role and to be very successful. And then the last quick story, another female story, is that the former DC police chief, Kathy Lanier, if I'm saying her last name right, I got to hear her speak at a conference once, and it was just fascinating. I mean, she dropped out of school at like 14, had a baby at 15. I mean, if anyone you would expect to be, headed down the poverty road, that would be a perfect recipe for it, right? Well, then she decided she wanted to turn her life around. She talked about getting a lot of help from her mom, watching her little boy and such, but went on to graduate from college, joined the DC police force, kept progressing upward very well, and then was chief for 10 years. So there's a person who was able to shift into a role that not only would be a difficult one, but there aren't a lot of women police chiefs. So she was fighting against a lot of sort of identity issues there with people not seeing her. Some of you said, well, people see me in that role. She's a great example of someone who was able to push past that and get to be seen in a role that's kind of unusual for a woman. So what we're going to talk about a little bit more here is that identity informs behavior, and behavior helps you with that identity. So sometimes if you're not really quite sure you're there, acting like it can be a big help. And we're going to talk about that some more here. How to make those identity shifts. You guys are saying it's what we've been waiting for. So I want to just present a model where behavior is at the center. And then you've got some other things around there, maybe some research into what behaviors you need, looking for models of the behavior that you want, having a plan, and practicing. And I use this kind of visual model because it's not really necessarily an iterative, a step-by-step. Some of these steps you may take multiple times. You may just keep kind of going around in a circle doing them. Some, because as you research and figure out your model and do your plan and do some practice, you may realize, hey, I need some more research. I need a better model. I need a better plan. So just kind of keep it. But the main thing is behaviors are at the center, and how do you get to those behaviors? And I think taking these 4 actions will help you get there. So to further explain the model a little bit, is that So for some of you wanting to shift, and especially since several people mentioned leadership, wanting to shift into that leadership role is to research and observe leadership behaviors. And maybe a lot of what you see in leadership isn't what you want to replicate. I certainly understand that. I've seen a lot of that. So it may be good to read some books. Maybe look at TED Talks. Here are some leaders that I want to emulate, even if I don't see a lot in my current organization. Then find that model and find a tribe of people who are also interested in that. One example of that for leadership might be joining Toastmasters, which has a leadership component and helps you with the public speaking, and it gives you a tribe of people who are trying to move forward in the same way that you are. And I'll talk about finding other tribes as well. And then planning, actually planning, laying out a calendar, figuring out how you're going to do it. And then going ahead and practicing your plan. Put it in, implement it, put it into motion, and then just keep working that around. So I want to do an example about becoming a writer. Now, interestingly, that wasn't anything that I saw that people were really focusing on, but I get that question a lot. How do I become a writer? I want to become a writer. I want to write a book. I've gotten quite a few coffees off of that question. So I thought that I would just focus on that a little bit and run through as an example of adopting those behaviors. So it's kind of like, what do successful writers do? Well, they write, right? You know, it's one thing that to do. What else do they do? How often do they do it? When do they do it? Why do they do it? You know, how do they get their inspiration? So on and on and on. And then a model might be picking a writer you admire and joining a writers association or a group. So for me, I've joined the Speechwriters Association. I've joined the Association of Talent and Development, ATD, NSA, National Speakers Association. And it's great to be able to hang with people who understand what I do and why it matters. So that can be a really important part of helping you shift that behavior. Another thing I do when I talk with my technical experts and helping them shift into becoming leaders is that we will go through, let's see, I'm going to try and use my pen here a little bit. So we'll go through some various steps here, and we'll talk about the things that experts tend to do and the things that good leaders do, and how do you move from one to another. And one thing that they tend to have in common is that they can both be good communicators. So that can be something to kind of build on. Okay, what are my current skill sets? What are the ones that I need? Where are the overlaps? And how can I adopt more of these new behaviors that I need? So the writer example. So if you're not really a writer and you want to become, you probably think about writing. You're probably a reader. Most writers are readers. You may talk about writing, complain about your day job, and maybe keep a journal. And then successful writers, okay, they write every day, they read about writing, they read for enjoyment, they research their topics, they participate in a writer's group, they edit the writing, and they complain about the publisher. So, okay, great, we have got at least one point where they agree there. But that's one thing I felt like, hey, I've really become a writer there when I wanted to complain about my publisher. But this is just the thing is that, make that list for yourself. And then continue with our 4 bubbles is that to plan, actually pull out that calendar and plan what you're going to do. So if you want to move into a leadership role and maybe you're not sure how you're going to do all that, maybe think about what are some things I'm going to read about leadership every day. I'm going to get a subscription to the Harvard Business Review, and I'm going to start reading those articles. Or maybe I want to shadow someone an executive in my organization, and I'm going to, by next week, I'm going to contact them and ask if I can do that. So really pull out that calendar and make a concrete plan. And it may not be enough to say, oh, I'm going to do it an hour a day, whatever it is, but to say, I'm going to do it from 6 to 7. And I'm going to, I've found a tribe, and I'm going to go to those meetings every month, week, whatever it is. Using my Toastmasters example, if you want to become a better public speaker, if that's something you feel like maybe is holding you back from a leadership role, find a Toastmasters group, commit to it, go to it. Then practicing, continuing to implement your plan. All the things that you may be doing with your tribe and also by yourself is implement it. Do it for at least a week, a month, and then compare it, okay, and really track it. Am I actually doing my plan? And if not, why not? And if not, it may be because there's a part of you that's really conflicted about, is this what I really want? Do I really want to let go of this other thing that I've enjoyed? Or maybe it's a self-confidence thing. And that, again, may be something you may have to learn to let go of that and keep focusing on the behaviors. And more often than not, that self-confidence will follow with it. So trying to put it all together for you, identity is powerful. Going back to talking about some of our transgender folks, that desire to identify with that other gender, powerful, powerful force that really urges them to do some pretty significant things. Our identity comes from many roles. Some of those are easy to bring on and to shed, like maybe some interest in hobbies. Others, not so much, can be very deeply ingrained. Our identity informs our behavior. But that behavior can help us shape that new identity. And so focus on the behaviors that you're going to need to shift into that role. So I want to give you some suggested action steps. Is pick that role or identity you want. Some of you already have it from the chat. We've seen that. Some of you may be kind of struggling. I know I'm not really happy where I am. I'm not quite sure where I want to go. I think we've all been there. Try to use the model to explore the behaviors that you need and make the plan of how you're going to get there. And it may be, as you implement that, you may realize, this isn't quite right either. That's okay, because you're going to just keep chipping away, keep finding out where it goes for you. And then I'd love to hear how it goes. So there's my email, eva@evadoyle.com. Really love to hear from you if this worked, if it didn't work, what you thought of it. Love to hear that. So some further reading that I wanted to talk about. William Bridges is kind of a go-to guy for transitions and change. He has a book on managing transitions. I really enjoyed that. It does talk about organizational as well as individual change, and talking about having a way of honoring maybe where you came from and how to move forward. And he talks about, you got to acknowledge the fact that there's always going to be some grief and loss in there, and that's okay. And you need to manage that and move in order to move past it. And then Chip and Dan Heath, I'm a big fan of the Heath brothers. They have a new book coming out in early October. I'm so excited. But the one that you might want to focus on for this is Switch, How to Change When Change is Hard. Got great examples there about how you do that and how you different ways to implement that. And I'm a big fan of all of their work, and I think can be really helpful for people doing that. So, and we're also going to be looking at some questions, and just a thank you. There's some contact information for me, cover of my book, and like I said, love to hear from people how things work. So let's see. Let's look at some of the questions now. I'm going to try to go back up. And let's see. I see one early on. Does my identity shift relate to the book Mind Shift, Breakthrough Obstacles to Learning and Discover Your Hidden Potential? I have heard of that book. I have not read it. I should put it on my reading list. So I honestly don't know exactly. I would guess there is some overlap. So I'm not sure if it's very helpful answer to that. And let's see, do we have any other questions, thoughts out there? Oh no.
Hi everyone, this is Danielle again. Just a reminder, again, she's taking questions, so if you do have anything you'd like to ask, go in that questions box, or there should also be a chat box that you see, so either one will work.
So I might be forced to break into song again.
Oh, we have a question. How can we gauge changes in perceptions and talk to people?
That's a good question about how do you gauge changes in perceptions. If you want to expand on that a little bit, but I'll start saying if in terms of, are people seeing you as a different, in a different way? And in some ways, it will depend. There are some people who've known you forever who will always know you as little Johnny or whatever. You know, they're never going to see a lot. But I think one way that you can gauge those changes is in their behaviors toward you. So if you're trying to move along and up in a corporate setting, and you want people to take you more seriously in that role, are they inviting you to certain meetings? Are they asking you certain questions? Are people do people seem to see you as a go-to person that they're getting in touch with more? So I think that's one way is to look at their behaviors, and certainly talking to people, finding mentors. What I've discovered, especially with not-for-profits, which are usually any type of organization, is usually very happy to have people who want to volunteer to help out, is that is one way to really make an impact in a group, is to start to volunteer for extra things. And the same thing to a certain extent in the corporate world, though I know sometimes if you volunteer for extra things, sometimes your boss is like, well, don't you have enough to do, you know, that kind of stuff. But that, so I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to babble, Carlos, so I'm not quite sure if I got to your question, but I hope that gave you some thoughts on that. But I think a way to gauge changes in other people's perceptions is definitely how are their behaviors, are they changing towards you? And that gives you some kind of bellwether. Oh, 3 more questions. Have I ever recommended people use some kind of personal coaching? Absolutely. Yeah, that can be very, very useful for transitions. Personal coaching, therapy, even, you know, definitely it can work. Is that absolutely? I think that can be very, very useful. If you're doing it right, how long should it take? It kind of depends on what you're trying to change. With some identity changes, like for example, you know, becoming a parent, I mean, some of that's going to, you know, may depend on biology. Others may be, so yeah, I think part of it is that if you feel stuck, that's a sign that something else needs to happen, and that's when a personal coach or a therapist or even finding the right book to read, finding the right group. So sorry that I can't help you more there, but you should be able to see and feel kind of incremental changes. And if you're not, then it may be time to try to take another step. What would my feedback be? Is how to explore one's passions in the midst of career discovery. What did you find most helpful? So I think with a lot of it, with exploring your passions in the midst of career discovery, I think for a lot of times sometimes that may end up being kind of a side gig. For me, it was kind of interesting. One of the things that really took off for me career-wise was being a trainer, and it was one of those things where I just sort of noticed that a lot of things, it just seemed like it would be better if we, you know, actually had a plan and you had to do these things. And so I just started kind of coming up with some training, and that just really took off, and it just seemed to be something that I had a talent for that I kind of didn't realize that I had a talent for. So I think that's definitely is the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, is the thing to continue to pursue. So if you get really excited about the fact that you're going to be briefing the new people, then maybe doing more speaking or doing training is something to explore. And so in terms of what was most helpful to me, I think a lot of it was just was experience, but certainly having a mentor, somebody I could talk with frankly, someone who was supportive, that was a big help for leadership, getting that kind of support. Because often as a corporate leader, like if there's an issue with an employee, they can trash you left, right, and center all day long, and there's nothing you can do about it as a boss. You can't say those things about them back. So it's really helpful to have a sounding board to just help keep your spirits up and function through some of those difficult times. Let me look at a couple other questions here. Specific advice related to shifting identity from stay-at-home mom back to being a member of the workforce. I would say it would be things as that to keep seeing yourself as a valuable member of society who has a lot to contribute. Volunteer work, might be one kind of a transition if you feel like maybe you don't have a skill set as healthy as you might like, so doing some volunteer work there. And also, again, to just think about all of the talents and things that go into being a staying-at-home mom in terms of organizational skills, setting priorities, dealing with emergencies and unexpected the things that all those go into, all of those types of skills that raising children really that you have to exercise, all of those people skills that are so important to the workplace and so often do get ignored in favor of what I would call the technical skills. But the people skills are the ones that really that are really going to matter, and that as a stay-at-home mom you probably have in spades. So that's one thing that I would do is just keep thinking about all of the skill sets that you have and how that can relate to the corporate world. See, what's the best way? How do you ensure you find a mentor that would work for you? You know, it is hard. It is hard because there are some organizations and such that will do a mentoring assignment program, and I haven't found those to be super successful. But the main, because yeah, for whatever reason, that matching process just doesn't always work. But defining a mentor that would work for you, I mean, some of it might be at work, it might be in some association or group that you might join, is to look for those people. And the one that would work for you is someone that you connect with. For me, that's often, you know, I like to make people laugh, I like to kind of goof around. And so it's for someone who kind of gets my sense of humor. That's kind of important for me, for them to realize, you know, when I'm being serious, when I'm not being serious, and so on. In terms of asking someone to be a mentor, most people are really flattered when you ask that. So it might just be, you know, hey, I was kind of looking for a mentor. We seem to, you know, connect. Would you have the time, availability? Would you be, you know, willing to do that? The other thing is, when you're asking to be the mentor, is to set the parameters of the relationship so that you could say, hey, you know, once a month I'd like to meet for lunch for an hour. And maybe occasionally a phone call, you know, make it clear that you're not going to take up tons and tons of your time. Be organized when you're ready to work with your mentor. Have a set of questions ready. Have specific skills that you want to work on that you think this mentor can help you with. So making it really clear that you want it to be a business relationship, a skill-based kind of relationship, and that you're not going to be an undue drag on their time. That kind of thing can really help people want to work with you as a mentor. Okay, so I think I'll turn it back over to Danielle.
Yes, thank you so much, Eva. This was really helpful information, and just based on the engagement in this chat box and all the questions, hopefully all of our alumni also felt the same. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope to see you again at our next webinar, which is next Tuesday, September 26th, also at noon Eastern, on how the Internet of Things is transforming industry. A recording of today's webinar will also be posted to our Smith School alumni website, and you will also receive an email with it as well. We hope that you have a wonderful day, and go Terps!